For the past couple of years, I've been researching how audiovisual media participate in the transformation of land by facilitating extractive processes, such as coal mining. I've mainly carried out research in Scotland and in Colombia, where I'm from, which is what I will be covering today. And these two contexts have very different mediated relationships to coal mining. In the UK, the traditional image of coal mining is well established. It has two dimensions which loom large both visually and narratively, the miner and the mining community. The BFI Player collection here of coal-related films highlights them, centering the powerful visual drama of sharp contrast and the human drama of hard, dangerous labor. And it's a great collection, Coal on Film, that the BFI have. Institutionally, the image of the miner in the UK was consolidated through the Mining Review, the monthly newsreel sponsored by the National Coal Board from 1947 to 83, which has been well documented and studied by several authors like Patrick Russell, Leo Entignap, Ross Cranston, and others. But on television, it's the drama of labor that has been center stage. Strikes and mining disasters, again, are kind of centered here from Ken Loach's The Price of Coal, play for today, and last year's Sherwood, where the long-term impact of the miners' strike continues to shape everyday lives. We also see here The Happy Lands, about the 1926 strike as experienced in the 5 coal fields. Of course, it's a feature film rather than TV broadcast, but it was broadcast by BBC Scotland. Sorry, my timer isn't running. And in the useful volume about popular culture and the miners' strike, edited by Simon Popple and Ian MacDonald, there's also an interesting reflection on the uses of broadcast archive in controversial work like Channel 4's When Britain Went to War from 2004. And yet, when coal mining comes up in the news nowadays, it's not that image that we tend to see. It's more kind of closer to this image, this visual impression. Discussions of energy transitions and the phasing out of coal are more likely to be accompanied by images like this, panoramas of open-cast mines that appear as vast, kind of devastated holes in the ground where even massive pieces of equipment appear small. So open-cast mining, my argument here, is a very different process that has a very different visual language associated with it. It's also institutionally distinct, and it has a different media history. So it's a story that features big machines and open skies rather than men crouching in the dark. Open-cast mining uses more land but less manpower, creating a very different relationship to local communities as well. Two case studies serve to emphasize those historical and contextual differences. So I'll talk about 2 sub-projects where I try to engage with audiovisual archives in order to facilitate new conversations about the past, present, and future of mining areas. So first I will talk about the east coast of Scotland, the Kingdom of Fife, where there were hundreds of pits and many open-cast workings too, including Westfield, once described as Europe's largest hole. Then I will talk about El Cerrejón in Colombia, which was one of the largest mines in South America when it started exporting coal in 1985 and continues to produce over 20 million tons of coal a year. So very briefly, open-cast mining was, in the UK, was mostly seen as supplementary to underground pit mining, used initially during wartime as a way to quickly access shallow workings of coal. It was not usually carried out directly by the National Coal Board, so it wasn't part of the same process of nationalization. It was subcontracted to private operators and seen mostly as a kind of civil engineering kind of work rather than mining as such. That means that also people that worked in the sector were not part of the National Union of Miners, generally speaking, and that put them at a very kind of difficult, problematic situation during the strikes. A shift to increase open-cast mining took place in the 70s and 80s, associated with the energy crisis in the 70s, and then later on, obviously, with the strikes. So again, as I said, this is a process that uses less manpower. and that is managed differently. This is reflected to some extent in what's in the archives. So this is obviously not a very precise overview of the contents of archives. It's just based on some keyword searches, but that gives an idea of what you find in the National Library of Scotland's Moving Image Archive. Lots of stuff about coal, not that much about Opencast. Another difficulty there is that this is sometimes also described as open pit or strip mining, so different terminology, and obviously not every clip will be described in this way, but it gives you an idea. A lot of the results in the National Library of Scotland come from Scottish Television and Grampian Television, so regional broadcasters, and their camera tapes that they have from their newscasts, so interesting material from there. I don't have any clips from those collections to show you right now, but I do have a clip that is similar to some of the stuff that you see there, but this one's actually from the archives here at the BFI. And it's from a 10-minute clip called Caller on the Doorstep, which was a London television service production from 1974. It's available on the BFI player. And apologies for the qualities of the clips. I didn't know that we were going to be showing them on a cinema screen. So,
coal mining at times seems almost an affront to the beauty of nature. Tearing coal from the ground is an ugly, dangerous business. These waste tips and slag heaps are the reminders of a now defunct deep mining industry at Cowdenbeath. They'll be cleared away as an added bonus during the strip mining operation.
So this gives you an idea of a very key form of framing of these clips around opencast mining as a restoration process. So again, seeing it as supplementary to existing underground pit mining and as a kind of way of dealing with the environmental legacies of pit mining. But this clip also captures some vox pops and opinions in the town of Cowdenbeath about the proposed opencast operation that was opening there.
And also my clothes, if the wind's blowing the wrong way, they get dirty and I have to do them over again.
So I love that clip because, of that different perspective there. So what this broadcast piece does is to offer literally a different perspective by locating the camera at street level, looking up at the machinery rather than down at the hole in the ground. So bringing these different planes of activity into frame, like here, offers an effective kind of visual synecdoche for the impact of mining on everyday life. And by moving away from the mine itself, it's also possible to interrogate other kind of highly gendered dimensions of its impacts. So this different relationship between opencast mining and the community is reflected on the fact that we don't get just interviews with miners' families, but with people who just kind of happen to live alongside the operation. So we screened this film as part of a project titled Opencast Echoes, working with artists and historians around the Westfield site, which is currently being redeveloped. And we did a guided walk, did some cyanotypes, looking at kind of plant life there, screening at Kelty Community Cinema here alongside other films and clips from different sources around this. And I'm going to kind of skip ahead this. But what we also did is we ended up taking the cyanotype prints from the plants from the site and sort of stringing them on a clothesline at Westfield to kind of echo again that little clip that we just saw. So what does that have to do with the Colombian case study then? So in Scotland, as I said, opencast mining comes at the end of, or like towards the end of a long history of mining. In Colombia, opencast was the start of the industry of mining, of the mining industry in the 1970s and 80s. So the Cerrejón project was an example of oil companies' efforts to diversify their portfolio during the 70s energy crisis. It was a partnership between Exxon and the Colombian state. So whilst Exxon had a huge public relations apparatus that produced magazines and films and so on, the Colombian government had to use more modest means to try and legitimize the extractive deal that they had made with Exxon. And the public broadcaster archives at Señal Memoria contain some examples of this, mainly in the form of distance learning programming. So programs made by the state-funded producers to support the distance learning primary education curriculum, mostly intended for adult learners. So pieces like this, 1985.
Por ejemplo, antes de que se diera comienzo a la explotación de los yacimientos carboníferos del Cerrejón, en el departamento de La Guajira, se llevó a cabo un estudio de impacto ambiental.
Sorry, it should have subtitles. I had subtitles in it, but I hope you're enjoying the library music there. Anyway, what the clip is saying is that before the exploitation started, they carried out an environmental impact assessment. So it's all framed within the idea that the environmental impact can be predicted and contained and justified by the kind of gains from the project. So framed as a national interest project, really. But this kind of technocratic optimism is visually articulated through aerial shots and through an emphasis on infrastructure, on the kind of railroad that they're constructing, the port that they also constructed, the way that the coal itself is managed and shipped, the logistics of it is part of that language. So underpinning this is obviously an ideology of developmentalism that is predicated on the expansion of consumer markets and the inclusion of new territories into the networks of transnational trade. Footage of the mine and the machinery was used in a variety of contexts, like this MATS program.
Otro de los recursos no renovables es el carbón. Tal vez hay quienes imaginan que este producto fue desplazado por el petróleo, mas no es así. El carbón es uno de los recursos naturales que más fuerza ha adquirido en el país. El consumo mundial de hulla continúa en su mismo nivel. Las reservas de carbón son cuantiosas, pues en la actualidad es el mineral más abundante. Colombia posee minas de carbón en los departamentos de Cundinamarca.
Anyway, this finishes with kind of a simple mathematical operation that, if you have 3 trucks and 3 tons, and it's just a setup for a maths problem. So to conclude then, nowadays both sides, Westfield over there and La Guajira here, are the subject of new techno-optimist narratives of energy transition. So while coal is still being eagerly mined in La Guajira, wind farms have started to spring up across the desert alongside it, signaling new waves of foreign investment and old ways of excluding communities from territorial decision-making. At Westfield, the ground has been leveled for an industrial park, which is meant to include wind farms as well, and an incinerator, somehow framed as a kind of green transition thing. In this, it's going to be used to generate electricity from trash, I guess, yeah. In this context, then resurfacing the stories told before about the containment and the restoration of these landscapes and of these environmental harms offers tools to those living on these damaged landscapes to contextualize and to negotiate the new promises that are being made. Thank you. Thank you, Dalila. Yes, there's a lot of material from Exxon. There's, I guess that the vast, mass of material is mainly print material. So Exxon published a magazine, a literary cultural magazine, in many countries, and Colombia was one of them. So they had the original sort of their magazine, The Lamp, in the U.S., and there were versions of it in many different languages. There was one in Colombia, which was a very important cultural magazine, as in it commissioned lots of artists, commissioned lots of writers. So it was, in the same way that nowadays we have the discussions around BP funding museums and galleries and so on. Exxon was a very important patron of the arts and especially kind of elite literary pursuits and so on. In many of the countries where they operated. So the content in that magazine about Cerrejón is really interesting because, again, it is a kind of upmarket magazine publication, and it takes on often a very kind of ethnographic approach. It has a lot about the ecology of the region as well, has kind of articles of like scientific dissemination around it. The main film that I've looked at is a 10-minute film, very high production value, beautiful cinematography, original music, everything. It's just titled El Cerrejón, made in 1988 by an American crew. And again, it has an element of the kind of ethnographic documentary, whilst also having elements of kind of this spectacle of machinery and scale and logistics. Really interesting piece of media. Obviously, didn't mention it here because the film is not broadcast, but it is on YouTube, so happy to share it with anyone. Great. I mean, the camera person put it on YouTube. Thank you. To my knowledge, it hasn't been used in a court of law, but it is used on social media often by communities or in kind of community-made documentaries as well, to kind of contrast the promises made or contrast, some of the, well, in some cases, the actual images, and kind of to map and to show how the territory has been transformed by the operation, but also in some cases to explore the claims made by the company at certain points in time and, contrast that with the reality. So that's certainly a very active kind of, the communities in this area is largely indigenous community, the Wayuu people, and they have been they're very active in media creation. They are very well organized around that. So there's a lot of contestation of kind of these images as well nowadays, but back in 1995, not so much.